Billionaire father catches the new housekeeper teaching 5 languages to his autistic daughter, and what happens next is unbelievable. The wall clock read 7:15 in the morning when Holden Mercer closed the front door. The sound of the latch echoed through the empty hallway, but he was already too far gone to hear it. His mind was already racing to the first meeting of the day, to the reports he needed to review, to anything that would keep his thoughts occupied. Inside, on the second floor, Tessa was awake. She always woke up early. At 5 years old, she had a routine she followed as if it were law. Wake up at 7, sit on the floor of her room, pick up the brown-haired doll that slept beside her. The doll's name was Sarah. At least that was the name Holden had given her. Tessa never confirmed or denied it. She just picked up Sarah and began her silent day. Tessa's room was a universe of its own. Dolls of all kinds occupied the shelves. Blondes, brunettes, redheads, some in elegant dresses, others in simple clothes. There were porcelain dolls that shone in the window light and cloth dolls worn by time. They all had one thing in common. They were perfectly organized, each in its exact place. Tessa knew every one of them. She knew where they were, how they were dressed, what expression they had on their faces. If someone moved a doll, and it had happened before, she would notice instantly. She wouldn't scream, wouldn't cry. She would just stand at the bedroom door, watching, until everything was back to normal. The Mercer house was the kind of place you'd see in magazines. An impeccable facade, a well-kept garden, windows always clean. The neighbors would comment on how Holden kept everything perfect, even as a widower. "He must have an excellent cleaning lady," they'd say. They didn't know that he was the one who cleaned, vacuumed, organized. The physical labor calmed him, gave purpose to his restless hands. Inside, however, the house breathed differently. There was a heavy quietness, as if the air were denser. The hallways echoed with solitary footsteps. The dining room, with its table for 6, received only 2 plates, and even then, rarely at the same time. Holden tried, he really did. Every morning, before leaving, he would knock lightly on Tessa's bedroom door. "Good morning, sweetie. Daddy's going to work now." Silence. "Are you going to be okay? Mrs. Morrison is coming to see you later." More silence. He would wait a few seconds, as if time could change anything. Then he would sigh and go down the stairs. Mrs. Morrison was the elderly neighbor who looked after Tessa during the day. A kind woman, but one who didn't understand much about different children. She would bring cookies, turn on the television, try to talk. Tessa accepted her presence because she was used to it, but she didn't interact. She stayed in her room, with her dolls, in her private world. Holden had tried school. 3 different schools, in fact. The first one said Tessa needed special care they couldn't provide. The second tried for a few weeks but called almost every day. She doesn't participate in activities. She doesn't respond when called. The other parents are concerned. The third didn't even accept her enrollment. He stopped trying. At work, Holden was a different man. He commanded meetings, made tough decisions, solved complex problems. His colleagues respected him. His clients trusted him. He was the kind of person who made things happen, but when he came home, he felt lost. How do you talk to a daughter who doesn't answer? How do you show love to someone who pulls away when you try to hug them? How do you be a father to a child who seems to live on another planet? These questions haunted him on his way back. Every afternoon, in traffic, he would rehearse conversations that never happened. He imagined Tessa running to hug him at the door, telling him about her day, asking him to read her a story. But when he got home, he found only the familiar silence. Tessa had her ways of communicating. He knew that. When she was happy, she would line up the dolls in perfect rows. When something bothered her, she would turn them all to face the wall. When she was hungry, she would go down to the kitchen and stand in front of the refrigerator. Holden had learned to decipher these signals, but he still felt like a foreigner trying to understand a complex language. The dolls were her obsession and her refuge. She would comb their hair carefully, adjust their dresses, whisper things only they could hear. Sometimes Holden would watch her through the crack of the door, seeing her interact with her silent friends in a way she never had with him. There were nights when he would lie awake, listening to the sounds of the house, The ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant noise of cars on the street. And from upstairs, very softly, Tessa's voice talking to her dolls. Loose words, incomplete sentences, conversations that only made sense in her private world. He had already lost his wife to a cruel illness that came all too quickly. After that, he started living on autopilot. Work, home, work, home. A mechanical routine that protected him from the pain, but also distanced him from everything, including Tessa. Without realizing it, he had built an invisible wall between them, thinking he was protecting them both. The silent house held two lonely hearts. A man who didn't know how to love a different child, a girl who didn't know how to show she wanted to be loved. And somewhere, between the perfectly aligned dolls and the empty hallways, there was a bridge waiting to be built. Holden didn't know it yet, but that bridge was about to arrive. When the cab stopped in front of the Mercer house, Eleanor Marlowe took a deep breath before grabbing her suitcase. The house was beautiful, bigger than she had imagined. A well-kept garden, light curtains in the windows, everything very organized. It looked like something out of a catalogue. "Good luck, miss," the driver said as he took the payment. Eleanor smiled and walked to the door. She had answered the job ad just 3 days ago, seeking housekeeper for domestic care and child supervision. The phone interview was brief. Holden Mercer seemed like a practical, direct man who didn't waste time beating around the bush. She rang the doorbell and waited. The morning sun was strong, making her squint a little. At 27, Eleanor carried a calmness that didn't match her age. Her brown eyes had a quiet depth, like someone who has seen enough not to be easily startled. The door opened and Holden appeared, wearing a dark suit and a perfectly knotted tie. "Elena Marlowe." "Yes, Mr. Mercer. Please come in." The house inside was even more impressive. Elegant furniture, paintings on the walls, everything clean and in order. Elena noticed, however, that something was missing. Maybe brighter colors, or that natural mess of a home where people actually live. It was like a model home, too beautiful to be real. "I'll show you the house and explain your duties," Holden said, guiding her through the living room. "As I mentioned on the phone, besides the cleaning and organizing, I'll need you to keep an eye on my daughter, Tessa. How old is she?" 5. Holden paused, his gaze becoming distant for a moment. "Tessa is autistic. She lives in her own world most of the time." Eleanor just nodded. She showed no surprise, nor that uncomfortable curiosity that usually appeared when the topic came up. "She speaks very little. Almost not at all, actually," he continued. "She doesn't go to school and spends most of her time in her room. Mrs. Morrison, our neighbor, has been looking after her while I work, but she's getting too old for it." Holden showed her the kitchen, the laundry room, the dining room. He explained the schedules, where the cleaning supplies were, how he liked things to be organized. He spoke like someone giving instructions in a business meeting. "Your room will be this one," he said, opening the door to a room on the ground floor. It was simple but comfortable. A single bed, a closet, a small desk by the window. "The bathroom is down the hall to the right." Elena placed her suitcase on the bed. "May I meet Tessa now?" The question seemed to catch Holden by surprise. See, people usually left that for last, like saving the hardest part for the end. "Of course," he replied, hesitant. "She's in her room. 2nd floor, first door on the left. But don't expect much. She doesn't usually react well to new people." Elena went up the stairs calmly. Holden followed her, keeping his distance as if he didn't want to interfere. When they reached the hallway, he pointed to the half-open door. "I'll let you go in alone. Tessa feels more comfortable when there aren't too many people in her room." Eleanor nodded and approached slowly. She knocked softly on the door. "Tessa, may I come in?" There was no answer. Elena pushed the door gently and entered. The room was a world of its own. The walls were a soft blue, and there were dolls everywhere. Dozens of them, perhaps over 100, arranged on shelves, chairs, small tables. Each seemed to have its specific place in an order that only made sense to the one who created it. In the center of the room, sitting on the rug, was Tessa, a small girl, with brown hair and delicate features that resembled her father's. She wore a simple blue dress and white socks. In her hands, a dark-haired doll that she was carefully arranging. Eleanor didn't move. She stood at the door, observing. She didn't speak, didn't try to get closer. She just waited, respecting the space of that small universe. Tessa continued playing, as if Elena weren't there. But something in her eyes, a quick glint that appeared and vanished, showed that she had noticed the presence. "Hello, Tessa," Elena said finally, her voice low and calm. "My name is Elena. I'll be working here in your home." Tessa didn't respond. She picked up another doll, one in a red dress, and placed it next to the first one. Elena realized she wasn't ignoring her presence. She was just following her own rhythm, absorbed in her private world. There was something fascinating about the way Tessa moved. Every gesture was precise. Every movement had a purpose. There were no wasted actions. Eleanor watched as the girl arranged the dolls in patterns that seemed random, but certainly had a special meaning for her. "Your dolls are very beautiful," Eleanor commented, without expecting a reply. Contrary to what Holden had said, Tessa showed no discomfort with the new presence. She didn't pull away, didn't turn her back, didn't show signs of distress. She continued her activity, as if Elena were just a natural part of the environment. After a few minutes, Elena left the room silently, closing the door carefully. Holden was waiting for her in the hallway, a look of surprise on his face. "She didn't get agitated," he said, more as a statement than a question. "No," Elena replied. "She seems very focused on what she's doing." "That's unusual. She usually gets upset when someone new enters her room." Elena just smiled. Maybe she was having a good day. They went down the stairs together. Holden checked his watch. "I need to go to the office. Mrs. Morrison will be here in an hour to stay with Tessa, as usual. Starting tomorrow, you'll take over completely." "Does she always stay in her room?" Elena asked. "Almost always," Holden replied, picking up his briefcase. "Sometimes she comes down for something to eat, but she goes right back. It's the place where she feels safe." When Holden left, Eleanor was alone in the living room. She looked around at the beautiful, empty house, thinking of the silent girl upstairs. There was something in this place, a quiet sadness, an absence that went beyond the physical space. She began to work, cleaning, organizing, getting to know every corner of the house. From time to time, she would stop and look up at the ceiling, imagining Tessa in her world of dolls. She wouldn't try to force a connection. That would come naturally with time. Elena knew that some flowers only open when they feel it's safe. The Mercer house needed more than cleaning. It needed life. And maybe, Elena thought, that was exactly why she was here. A week had passed since Elena's arrival. The Mercer house already showed small changes. The vases had fresh flowers. The windows were left open longer, letting in the morning breeze. Holden had noticed the difference but hadn't said anything. He just nodded in approval when he saw the new arrangement on the dining table. Elena adapted quickly to the routine. She woke up early, prepared breakfast, organized the house. Holden left for work at 7:30. Always formal, always on time. Tessa would come down around 8, eat some cereal or toast, and then go back to her room, to her dolls, to her world. In the first few days, Elena respected the girl's space. She didn't try to force conversations, didn't insist on playing. She was just present, attentive, available. When she entered the room to bring a snack or make the bed, she would talk to Tessa normally, without expecting answers. "It's a beautiful day outside. The roses in the garden are blooming." Or, "I put some apple juice and cookies on your little table. You can have them whenever you want." Tessa didn't respond verbally, but Elena noticed that little by little, the girl was watching her more. It wasn't a direct gaze. It came from the corner of her eye, like sunbeams peeking through clouds, brief, shy, but present. On Thursday of that week, while tidying Tessa's room, Elena decided to try something different. The girl was sitting in the middle of the rug, as always, playing with 3 dolls she had positioned in a semicircle. She seemed to be having a silent conversation with them, moving her lips slightly from time to time. Elena approached carefully, kneeling at a respectful distance. She picked up one of the pillows that had fallen from the bed and, as she placed it back, said casually, "Hola, Tessa." The word floated in the air like a colorful soap bubble. Elena didn't look directly at the girl. She continued arranging the pillows, giving her time and space. After almost a minute of silence, the surprise came. "What's that?" Tessa's voice was soft, a little hoarse, as if not used often. Elena turned slowly, not showing any shock, although her heart had quickened at the unexpected response. "It's hi in Spanish," she replied naturally, a way to say hello in another language. Tessa looked at her dolls, then at Elena. Her eyes, a deep brown like her father's, held a cautious curiosity. "Do you know more of those words?" The question came so directly, so clearly, that Elena almost forgot she was talking to a child who, according to Holden, almost never communicated. "Yes," she answered with a calm smile. "I know many words in many different languages. Do you want to learn?" Tessa didn't answer immediately. She looked at the doll in her lap, a redhead with a green dress, as if consulting it. Then, without looking up, she gave a small, affirmative nod. It was a shy yes, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Elena sat on the rug, maintaining a comfortable distance. She didn't want to invade Tessa's space or make her feel pressured. "In English, we say hello," Elena began, with clear, slow pronunciation. "In French, it's bonjour. In Italian, ciao." Tessa listened attentively, her eyes never leaving her doll. After a moment, she repeated softly, "Hola, hello, bonjour, ciao." Her pronunciation was surprisingly accurate, as if each word were a small gem she examined carefully before putting away. "Very good," Elena said with calm enthusiasm. "And there's also a way to say hello without using your voice." Tessa finally looked at her, curious. Elena raised her open hand near her face and waved slightly. "In ASL, American Sign Language, we can say hello like this. It's how people who can't hear or speak talk." The girl watched the movement intently, as if memorizing every detail. Then, still holding her doll with one arm, she raised her other hand and imitated Elena's gesture, almost perfectly. It was in that moment that Elena had an idea. "Tessa, would you like your dolls to learn to speak in different languages too?" For the first time that morning, a true spark appeared in the girl's eyes. It wasn't a smile. Her face remained serious, focused. But there was a new light there, a flicker of genuine interest. Tessa looked at the dolls arranged around her and then at Elena. "Sarah, can they learn?" "Of course they can," Elena replied. "We can teach each one a different language. How about that?" Tessa thought for a moment, and then, to Elena's surprise, held out the redhead doll toward her. "This is Lily. She can speak English." It was the first time Tessa had mentioned the name of one of her dolls, the first time she had shared a piece of her inner world. "Nice to meet you, Lily," Elena said, pretending to greet the doll. Then, in English, she added, "Hello, Lily. How are you today?" Tessa pulled the doll back and held it close to her ear, as if listening to it speak. After a moment, she said, "Lily is fine. She wants to know how to say thank you in English." "Thank you," Elena replied. In English, obrigada is thank you. "Thank you," Tessa repeated, and then brought the doll to her ear again. She nodded seriously, as if receiving instructions, and then pointed to another doll, one with black hair and a blue dress. "This is Sophie. She wants to speak French." Thus began the game that would change everything. Elena showed her how to say thank you in French, merci, in Spanish, gracias, in Italian, grazie, and how to make the sign for thank you in ASL. Tessa absorbed every word, every gesture, with impressive concentration. She didn't smile, didn't show emotion openly, but there was a different vibration about her, as if a switch had been flipped. In the following days, the game continued and expanded. Elena brought a small notebook and wrote the words down so Tessa could see how they were spelled. Although the girl couldn't read completely yet, she paid attention to the shapes of the letters, the differences between the words in each language. "How do you say agua in Spanish?" Tessa asked one afternoon, while they were playing with a doll in a blue dress that had been designated as the Spanish doll. "Agua," Elena replied. "It's pronounced agua, with a very soft G-E. Agua, Tessa repeated, savoring the word. And in French? Ew, Elena said. It looks strange, doesn't it? It's spelled E-A-U, but pronounced O. Tessa frowned, intrigued by the disparity between spelling and pronunciation. This kind of linguistic curiosity seemed to fascinate her especially. Little by little, the vocabulary grew. Colors, animals, everyday objects. Elena realized that Tessa had an extraordinary memory. She only needed to hear a word once or twice to store it perfectly. One sunny morning, while Elena was tidying the room, Tessa surprised her. She had arranged 5 of her favorite dolls in a circle, and pointing to each one, said, "This is Lily, she speaks English. This is Sophie, she speaks French. This is Carmen, she speaks Spanish. This is Bella, she speaks Italian. And this is Nina, she speaks with her hands." Elena stopped what she was doing, touched by the girl's meticulous organization. It was the first time Tessa had taken the initiative to structure the game. "Very good, Tessa. Do you remember how each of them says, 'Good morning'?" Without hesitation, the girl went from one doll to the next. "Good morning, bonjour, buenos dias, buongiorno." When she got to Nina, the ASL doll, Tessa made the sign for good morning, touching her chin with her flat hand and then moving it forward and away, with a precision that surprised Elena. "Perfect," Elena exclaimed, genuinely impressed. Tessa didn't smile. Smiles were still rare, but her eyes had a different glint. There was pride there, the satisfaction of mastering something, of being capable. One afternoon, while Elena was folding some clothes on the dresser, Tessa asked something that caught her off guard. "Why do you know so many languages?" It was the first personal question the girl had asked. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about the best way to answer. "When I was little, about your age, my family traveled a lot. My father worked in international business. We lived in different countries, and I needed to communicate with other children, so I started learning." Tessa absorbed the information in silence, as she did with everything. After a moment, she asked, "Did you have many friends?" There was something in the question, a curiosity that went beyond the words, a desire to understand what it was like to connect with other people. "A few," Elena answered honestly. "Not many, because we moved frequently. But in each place I found someone I could talk to. Sometimes, just trying to speak their language was enough to make them open up to me." Tessa looked at her dolls, scattered on the rug, each representing a language, a world, a possibility. "My dolls are my friends," she said in a low voice. "They understand when I talk to them." "I'm sure they do," Elena agreed. "And now they can understand you in several different languages." At the end of that week, Elena decided to take it a step further. She brought small colored stickers and suggested they mark each doll according to its language. Blue for French, red for Spanish, green for English, yellow for Italian, and purple for ASL. Tessa accepted the idea with contained enthusiasm. She carefully placed the stickers on each doll's foot, then organized them into groups by language. It was a way to bring order to her new knowledge, to classify and categorize, something that seemed to bring her a sense of security. The language game became part of their daily routine. In the morning, after breakfast, and in the afternoon, before snack time. Elena kept the sessions short, always mindful of Tessa's energy level. When she noticed signs of fatigue or overload, a more distant look, stiffer movements, a tendency to withdraw, she would gently end the activity, without pressure. "I think the dolls are tired from so much learning today," she would say naturally. Let's let them rest a bit." This sensitivity to Tessa's rhythm was crucial. The girl never felt pressured, never felt inadequate. The learning happened on her time, in her way. On a particularly quiet afternoon, while they were practicing colors in Italian, something extraordinary happened. Tessa, holding her Italian doll, said, "Rosso is red, verde is green, blue is blue." Then, looking directly at Elena, a rare, intentional gaze, she completed, "Io sono Tessa, tu sei Elena." It was a complete, correct sentence in Italian. "I am Tessa. You are Elena." Elena felt a lump in her throat. It wasn't just the fact that Tessa had formed a complete sentence in another language. It was the content of the sentence, The affirmation of identity, the recognition of the connection between them. "Si, io sono Elena," she replied softly, "and I am very happy to be here with you." Tessa didn't respond with words. She just kept looking at Elena for a few more seconds, a time that for her seemed immense, before returning her attention to the dolls. But something had changed. A door had been opened, not thrown wide, just ajar, enough for a ray of light to pass through, illuminating possibilities that once seemed impossible. That night, while tidying the kitchen after dinner, Elena heard Holden go upstairs to say goodnight to his daughter, as he did every night. It was usually a silent ritual. He would go in, tuck her in, sometimes read a story, even without getting a response, and then leave. This time, however, something different happened. She couldn't hear clearly, but there was a murmur, an exchange of words. And when Holden came downstairs, his face had an expression Elena hadn't seen yet. Surprise, contained emotion, hope. "Tessa told me, 'Buenas noches,'" he commented, standing at the kitchen door, as if he still couldn't believe it. "In Spanish?" Elena smiled, continuing to put away the dishes. "We've been learning some words in other languages." She's never done that before," Holden said, his voice betraying the emotion he was trying to control. "Spoken spontaneously, I mean, especially at night, when she's tired." Elena just nodded, understanding the significance of that small moment. "Languages are doors, Mr. Mercer," she said finally. "And sometimes, when one is closed, another might be open." Holden looked at her for a long moment, as if seeing her for the first time. "Thank you," he said simply, before retreating to his office. In her room, alone with her dolls, Tessa quietly repeated the new words she had learned, savoring each sound, each meaning. She felt different. She couldn't name the feeling. She didn't yet have enough words in any language for that, but it was good. It was as if, suddenly, her world had gotten bigger, more colorful, safer. October arrived, bringing with it a subtle change in the air. The leaves on the garden trees were beginning to turn shades of red and gold. Inside the Mercer house, another transformation, deeper and more significant, continued to blossom. Every morning, following a routine that had established itself naturally, Eleanor would go upstairs around 8 o'clock, carrying a tray with Tessa's breakfast. The girl who used to wait quietly in her room was now often sitting at the top of the stairs, hugging one of her dolls, usually Lily, the English doll, or Nina, the ASL doll. "Bonjour, Tessa," Eleanor would say upon seeing her. "Bonjour," the girl would reply, her eyes following Elena's every move as she climbed the last few steps. It was a simple but meaningful ritual. The waiting in itself was a sign of change. Tessa, who once seemed indifferent to people's comings and goings, now anticipated the moment she would see Elena. One morning, something new happened. When Elena reached the top of the stairs, Tessa stood up and, without warning, held out her hand. A small gesture, but an extraordinary one for a child who avoided physical contact. Eleanor took the offered hand naturally, as if it was something they always did, and together they walked to the room. From that day on, the gesture was repeated. Not always. There were days when Tessa was more withdrawn, more absorbed in her inner world, but often enough to become part of their routine. Tessa's small hand in Elena's, a vote of confidence renewed each morning. "Como se dice estrella in Italiano?" Tessa asked one afternoon, while arranging her dolls in a circular pattern on the floor. "C'est Stella," replied Elena, who was folding some clothes on the dresser. "Stella," Tessa repeated, savoring the word. "And in French?" "Étoile, étoile," the girl echoed. Then, picking up a doll in a silver dress that she rarely used in their language games, she said, "This is Stella. She can speak all the languages of the stars." It was the first time Tessa had created a new character for the language game. Elena smiled, delighted by the girl's imagination. "All the languages of the stars? That must be a lot of languages." Tessa nodded seriously. "The stars are very old. They've seen everything. They know all the words." There was something poetic in the observation, a depth that was surprising. It wasn't the first time Elena had noticed flashes of a unique intelligence in Tessa, a different and special way of seeing the world. "What do you think the stars would say if they could talk to us?" Elena asked, sitting on the floor near Tessa, but not too close. Tessa thought for a long moment, her face concentrated. "They would say, 'Don't be afraid of the dark. We are here.'" The answer touched Elena in a way she hadn't expected. It was more than a beautiful sentence. It was a glimpse into Tessa's heart, of how she saw the world, of her own fears and comforts. "That's very beautiful, Tessa. And very true." The girl just nodded, returning her attention to her dolls, but something had been shared between them, something precious and fragile like a shooting star. The next day, after lunch, Tessa did something unprecedented. She came downstairs on her own, looking for Eleanor, who was in the laundry room organizing clothes. "Elena," she called from the doorway, her voice low but clear. Elena turned casual, surprised to see Tessa there, away from her room, deliberately seeking her out. "Hi, Tessa. Do you need anything?" The girl shook her head, then said, "I want to show you something." It was an invitation, the first Tessa had made spontaneously. Elena left the clothes aside and followed the girl upstairs to her room. There, Tessa went to a small wooden box on her shelf, a box that Elena had never opened while tidying up, respecting the child's privacy. Tessa opened the box carefully and took out a doll different from all the others. It was older, with a slightly faded dress and messy blonde hair. It had marks of use, of love, of time. "This is Mia," Tessa said, holding the doll with reverence. "She was my mom's." Elena felt a lump in her throat. It was the first time Tessa had mentioned her mother. Holden had briefly told Elena about his wife's passing when Tessa was only 2, but the subject never came up between him and his daughter, at least not in Elena's presence. "She's very special," Elena said softly. Tessa nodded. "Mia doesn't speak any languages. She only listens." There was a simple wisdom in those words, an intuitive understanding of grief, of the silence that is sometimes necessary. "Sometimes, listening is the most important thing," Elena agreed. Tessa looked at the doll for another moment, then held it out to Elena. "Oh, you can hold her." It was more than offering a doll. It was sharing a memory, a connection, a part of herself that Tessa kept protected from the world. Eleanor accepted Mia carefully, honored by the trust placed in her. "Thank you for showing me Mia," Eleanor said. "It's an honor to meet her." Tessa watched as Elena held the doll with respect, without judgment, without invasive questions. After a moment, she took Mia back and placed her carefully in the box. "She liked you," she said simply. In the days that followed, the bond between Tessa and Elena continued to strengthen, in small but significant ways. Tessa began to seek out Elena when she was excited about a new word she had learned. She started sharing her observations about the world, brief, sometimes enigmatic comments, but always genuine. "The rain is speaking Italian today," she said one morning as they watched a light storm fall outside the window. "Why do you think so?" Elena asked, curious. "Because it's soft and pretty, like Italian words." It was the kind of poetic connection Tessa often made, links between sounds, sensations, and languages that reflected her unique way of processing the world. Most notable, however, was how Tessa sought Elena's presence. Not in a dependent or anxious way, but with a quiet confidence, a genuine desire to be near. When Elena sat in the living room to read during her free time, Tessa would sometimes come down with a book or a doll and sit silently at the other end of the sofa. They didn't necessarily talk. They simply existed in the same space, comfortable with each other's presence. It was a kind of intimacy Tessa had never shown with anyone but Holden, and even with her father, the connection seemed different. With Elena, there was a spontaneous quality, an active choice to seek proximity, not out of need or obligation, but out of genuine desire. One afternoon, while Eleanor was organizing some books on the living room shelf, Tessa surprised her with a question, "Are you going to leave someday?" The question, asked in a low but clear voice, made Eleanor stop what she was doing and turn to the girl, who was sitting on the floor with her dolls. "Why are you asking that, Tessa?" The girl shrugged, a rare gesture for her. "How do people leave?" There was a sad wisdom in that simple observation, the early understanding of a child who had already experienced loss. Elena sat on the floor, near Tessa, but not too close. "I really like being here with you," she answered honestly. "I have no plans to leave." Tessa processed the information in silence, her face serious. After a moment, she stood up, walked over to Elena and, in a gesture she had never made before, lightly rested her head on her shoulder. It was just for an instant, brief, fleeting, precious, before she returned to her dolls. But it was enough. In that small gesture was everything: trust, affection, connection. A real bond, built not on need or convenience, but on mutual acceptance and respect. That night, while tidying the kitchen after dinner, Elena reflected on the transformation she had witnessed in Tessa over these months. It wasn't a dramatic or complete change. Tessa was still an autistic child, with her peculiarities and challenges. There were still difficult days, moments of withdrawal, occasions when the world seemed too much for her, but there was also a new openness, a willingness to explore, to connect. With Elena, Tessa had found not just a language teacher, but someone who saw her, truly saw her, without expectations or judgments. Someone who understood that her silence was not absence, but a different form of presence. And in that safe space, Tessa was, little by little, finding her own voice. The 3 o'clock meeting was cancelled without notice. Holden looked at the empty slot in his schedule and hesitated. Normally, he would fill that time with other tasks, other reports, other calls. The office was his refuge, the place where he knew exactly what to do and how to act. At home, things were different, less controllable, more complicated, but something pushed him that afternoon. Maybe Eleanor's small comments about Tessa's progress, maybe the memory of his daughter saying buenas noches a few weeks ago, maybe just an intuition that he was missing something important. "I'm leaving early today, Diane," he told his assistant. "Move anything urgent to tomorrow." The drive home had never seemed so short. The traffic, by some miracle, was flowing smoothly. The sky was clear with a few sparse clouds, and the autumn sun created golden patterns on the car's dashboard. Holden parked in front of the house at 3:40. It was strange to see his house at that time of day, different. The shadows fell at angles he wasn't used to seeing, revealing details that usually went unnoticed. The small bird's nest in the corner of the eaves, the varied colors of the garden flowers, the texture of the wooden door. He entered quietly, without announcing his arrival. The house was quiet, but not with that heavy silence he used to find. There was something different in the air, an energy, a presence that went beyond the physical. From the stairs came a soft sound, voices, one deeper, adult, the other high-pitched, childish, both speaking in French. Holden went up the steps slowly, following the voices to Tessa's room. The door was ajar, and he stood there, watching without being seen. What he witnessed left him breathless. In the middle of the room, sitting on the rug, were Eleanor and Tessa. Between them, 5 dolls formed a perfect circle. Each doll had a small colored sticker on its foot, and Tessa was pointing to them one by one, saying something in different languages. "Bonjour, je m'appelle Sophie," she said, holding the doll in the blue dress. Her pronunciation was clear, precise. "Très bien," Elena replied with an encouraging smile. "And how does Sophie ask, 'How are you?'" "Comment ça va," Tessa answered without hesitation. "Perfect. And now, what would Carmen say?" Tessa picked up another doll, one with a red dress. "Hola, me llamo Carmen. ¿Cómo estás?" Elena clapped softly. "Excellent. And Bella?" "Ciao, mi chiamo Bella. Come stai?" The sequence continued. Tessa moved on to the doll in the green dress, speaking in English, and then to the last one, making precise gestures with her hands. ASL, Holden realized, stunned. But it wasn't just the command of languages that impressed him. It was Tessa, his daughter, who rarely spoke, who avoided eye contact, who always seemed distant, was fully present in that moment. Her eyes shone with concentration, and could it be pleasure? There was a lightness in her movements, a fluidity he had never seen before, and then it happened. Tessa laughed. It was a brief, almost contained sound, but undeniably a laugh. Eleanor had made some comment about one of the dolls having a funny accent, and Tessa responded with that small, crystalline laugh that Holden hadn't heard in years. The sound hit Holden like a wave, making him lean against the doorframe. An intense, almost painful emotion rose from his chest to his throat. That's when Elena saw him. "Mr. Mercer," she said, surprised. "Sash, we didn't hear you come in." Tessa turned quickly, her body instantly more tense, her face returning to its usual neutral expression. But there was something different even so, a remnant of that light Holden had glimpsed seconds before. "Daddy," she said simply. "Hi, sweetie," Holden replied, his voice a bit hoarse. "Sorry to interrupt. My meeting was cancelled." Eleanor started to get up. We were just practicing languages," Holden completed, entering the room slowly. "I saw it was impressive." Eleanor smiled, relaxing a little. "Tessa has an incredible gift for languages, an extraordinary memory and perfect pronunciation." Holden looked at his daughter, who had returned her attention to the dolls, arranging them in a precise line. "I didn't know that," he said, more to himself than to Elena. There was a moment of silence, only the soft sound of the dolls being arranged by Tessa filling the room. "Kasham, well, I'll leave you to it," Elena said finally. "I have a few things to finish in the kitchen." When she left, Holden sat on the floor, near Tessa, but keeping a respectful distance. He watched his daughter arrange the dolls, each in its exact place. "Do you like learning different languages?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Tessa didn't answer immediately. When she finished lining up the last doll, she said, without looking at him, "Yes, each language has a different sound, like different songs." It was the longest sentence Holden had heard from her in a long time. And it wasn't just the number of words, but the quality, the clear articulation, the complete thought, the surprising metaphor. That's very interesting, Tessa," he said, genuinely amazed. "Which is your favorite language?" Tessa thought for a moment. "Italian for happy days, French for rainy days, ASL for when I don't want to make noise." Holden felt something tighten in his chest. How had he never noticed this depth in his daughter, this sensitivity, this understanding of the world? "Yes, and for talking to Daddy?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Tessa finally looked at him, briefly. "All of them, a little bit of each." The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. Holden didn't try to force more conversation, just stayed in the room, sometimes watching Tessa play, sometimes looking out the window, absorbing the reality of what he had witnessed. As the sun began to set, he went down to the kitchen. Elena was preparing dinner, chopping vegetables with precision. "She's never communicated like that," Holden said, without preamble, leaning against the kitchen counter. "I've tried private tutors, child development specialists, therapists. She wouldn't open up." Elena continued chopping the vegetables for a moment, thoughtful. "She didn't need someone to teach," she finally replied, with serenity. "She needed someone to be with her, on her own time." The simplicity of the answer struck Holden as an obvious truth he had never seen. "How did you know?" he asked, a rare vulnerability in his voice. Eleanor put the knife on the cutting board and looked at him. "I didn't know, I just watched, I listened." Not with the expectation that she would be one way or another, but accepting her exactly as she is. Holden absorbed the words, feeling them resonate with something deep inside him, an intuitive knowledge that had been smothered by years of worry, frustrated expectations, and fear. "The first day I met Tessa," Elena continued, "I noticed how she organized her dolls. There was a logic there, a pattern. I realized she wasn't absent. She was just processing the world in a different way. Later, when I discovered her response to words in other languages, it was like finding a door that was already there, waiting to be opened." "I should have seen it," Holden said, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "I'm her father. I should have noticed." "Sometimes we're too close to see clearly," Elena replied, no judgment in her voice. "And you were dealing with your own pain, too." The indirect mention of his wife's death made Holden look away. It was true. After losing Charlotte, he had closed himself off, taking refuge in work, in routine, in the predictable certainties of his professional life. Without realizing it, he had distanced himself emotionally, not just from Tessa, but from himself. "She's in there," Elena said softly. "Whole, brilliant, sensitive. She just expresses herself differently. Sees the world from an angle most of us have never experienced." Holden nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions: gratitude, hope, and a twinge of sadness for the lost time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for seeing what I couldn't see." Eleanor smiled slightly. "It's not too late, Mr. Mercer. It's never too late." That night, dinner was different. Holden, Tessa, and Elena sat together at the table, something that rarely happened, as Tessa usually ate in her room. The conversation didn't flow like in conventional families, with questions about the day and shared stories. But there was a presence, a silent connection that hadn't existed before. At one point, Tessa looked at her plate and said, "Carrot, zanahoria." "Carota, carrot." "Carrot in 4 languages," Holden observed. Impressed, Tessa nodded, pleased with herself. Then, pointing to her glass, she continued, "O, agua, aqua, water." It was her way of participating, of being present, of connecting through the language she had discovered. Later, while Elena was washing the dishes and Tessa had already gone up to her room, Holden remained seated at the table, lost in thought. For the first time in a long time, he felt something different growing inside him, something he had forgotten: hope. The days following Holden's discovery were marked by a subtle change in the Mercer house. The air seemed lighter, the walls less distant, the silences less heavy. Holden began to adjust his schedule, leaving the office earlier when possible, delegating some responsibilities he had previously considered exclusively his. His first attempt at connection was clumsy, like a dancer who has long forgotten the steps. On Saturday morning, he entered Tessa's room carrying a small box. "Good morning, sweetie, I brought you something." Tessa, sitting on the floor with her dolls, didn't look up. Her body grew slightly tenser, her shoulders more squared, as if protecting herself from something. Holden hesitated, then placed the box on the floor at a respectful distance. "They're cards with words in different languages. I thought you might like them." It was a set of colorful flashcards he had found in an educational toy store. Each card had a word in English, Spanish, French, German, and Italian, with small illustrations. Tessa didn't move to get the box. She continued arranging her dolls, as if Holden wasn't there. "Well, I'll leave it here," he said, trying to hide the disappointment in his voice. "If you want, we can look at them together later." He left the room feeling defeated. In the hallway, he ran into Elena, who was carrying clean sheets. "She needs time," Elena said softly. "New routines are hard." Holden nodded, trying to understand. "But she opened up to you so quickly." "Every relationship is different," Elena replied, "and the relationship between you two has its own history, its own layers. Give her time, and give yourself time." In the following days, Holden kept trying. Not intrusively or desperately, but with small, consistent gestures. He would spend a few minutes in Tessa's room, sometimes just sitting by the window reading a book, offering his presence without demanding anything in return. Other times, he would comment on something outside: a bird in the garden, the particularly blue sky, the first autumn leaf falling. Tessa didn't respond verbally, but Holden began to notice small changes. She no longer moved away when he entered. Sometimes she would watch him out of the corner of her eye. Once, when he mentioned seeing a squirrel in the yard, she briefly stopped what she was doing, a sign that she had heard, that his words had penetrated her world. On a rainy Tuesday, Holden arrived home at 4 in the afternoon, wet and a little annoyed by the slow traffic. He went upstairs to change and, passing by Tessa's room, saw the door ajar. She was there, as always, organizing her dolls. But something caught his attention. The box of flashcards, previously untouched, was open. The cards were spread on the floor, arranged in some kind of pattern that only made sense to her. He said nothing, just watched for a moment, feeling a wave of emotion he couldn't quite name. There was hope in it, mixed with a little sadness for the lost time, and a touch of fear, of failing, of not being enough, of not knowing how to be the father Tessa needed. The following Saturday, Holden woke up early and made breakfast, something he rarely did. When Elena entered the kitchen, she seemed surprised to find him at the stove. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer. You're up early." "I thought I'd try something different," he replied, flipping a pancake with surprising skill. Tessa used to like pancakes on Saturdays. When she was younger, Elena smiled, sensing the importance of the gesture. "Need any help?" "No, thank you. I want to do this myself. Could you please call Tessa when it's ready?" 20 minutes later, the table was set. Golden pancakes, maple syrup, freshly cut fruit, orange juice. Holden had even placed a small vase of flowers in the center of the table, yellow daisies, simple but cheerful. Eleanor went upstairs to get Tessa, while Holden waited, as nervous as a teenager before a first date. He heard footsteps on the stairs, Tessa's light ones, Elena's firmer ones, and took a deep breath. Tessa stopped at the kitchen entrance, her eyes quickly scanning the room, registering the changes to the usual routine. For a moment, Holden feared she would turn around and go back upstairs. Instead, after a few seconds, she walked to the table and sat in her usual chair. "Good morning, Tessa," Holden said, trying to keep his voice casual. "I made pancakes. Do you still like pancakes?" Tessa looked at the plate in front of her. Then, without looking up, she said in a low voice, "Pancakes, crepe, pancakes, fritel." It was her way of saying yes, through the languages that now formed her bridge to the world. Holden smiled, feeling a lump in his throat. Exactly. In 4 languages. Breakfast passed in relative silence, but it was a different kind of silence. Not heavy or uncomfortable, just quiet. Eleanor occasionally joined the conversation, serving as a sort of natural facilitator between father and daughter. When Tessa needed something, like more syrup, she didn't ask directly, but Eleanor noticed and suggested, "Tessa, can you ask your dad?" In Italian, maybe? After a moment of hesitation, Tessa looked briefly at Holden and said, "Sciroppo, per favore." "Prego," Holden replied, passing the syrup with a smile, grateful for the small interaction. After breakfast, while Eleanor washed the dishes, Holden asked Tessa if she would like to show him the language cards. To his surprise, she nodded and went upstairs, with him following at a respectful distance. In the room, Tessa pointed to the cards arranged on the floor. Holden realized they weren't random. They were grouped by categories: animals, colors, household objects, foods. "You organized them," he observed, impressed. "That's a very clever system." Tessa didn't reply, but sat on the floor near the cards. After a moment of hesitation, Holden did the same, maintaining a distance he knew was comfortable for her. "Which is your favorite category?" he asked. Tessa reached out and touched the animal cards. "You like animals?" A small affirmative nod. "So which one is your favorite?" Tessa thought for a moment, then picked up the card with the image of a butterfly. "Butterfly?" Holden read. "Mariposa, papillon, Schmetterling, farfalla." "Farfalla," Tessa repeated, her voice almost a whisper. "In Italian, it sounds like flapping wings." The observation surprised Holden. It was poetic, sensitive, revealing a perception of the world he had never imagined his daughter possessed. "You're right," he said, genuinely impressed. "Farfalla. It really does sound like flapping wings." They stayed there, looking at the cards, with Holden occasionally asking about one word or another, and Tessa answering briefly, usually with a single word or short phrase. It wasn't a fluid or conventional conversation, but it was a connection, small, fragile, but real. The days turned into weeks. October moved on, with its cold mornings and golden afternoons. Holden maintained his new routine, coming home earlier whenever possible, participating in moments with Tessa, observing and learning. One afternoon, he found Elena and Tessa in the room, practicing languages with the dolls, just as he had seen on that first revealing day. He stood at the door, not wanting to interrupt, just watching the interaction between them. And how would Nina say, "I'm happy" in ASL? Elena asked, referring to the doll that represented sign language. Tessa made a gesture with her hands, brushing them upwards against her chest in a circular motion, the sign for happy or joy. "Perfect," Elena praised. "You learn so fast." It was then that Tessa noticed Holden at the door. There was a moment of hesitation, a brief freezing in her posture. Then, to his surprise, she picked up one of the dolls, the one in the green dress, which he knew represented English, and held it out to him. "This is Lily," Tessa said. "She speaks English. Do you want to hold her?" The gesture was simple, but its meaning was immense. It was an invitation, an opening, a hand extended across the chasm that had formed between them over the years. It was Tessa saying, in her own way, "You can come into my world." Holden felt his eyes sting. He entered the room slowly and accepted the doll carefully, as if he were receiving something precious and fragile, which in fact he was. "Hello, Lily," he said, sitting on the rug with them. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Across the circle, Eleanor watched discreetly, a small smile on her lips. There was something deeply satisfying in witnessing that moment, not just professionally but humanly, a reconnection, a small, everyday miracle. From that day on, something definitively changed in the dynamic between Holden and Tessa. Not dramatically or suddenly, real transformations rarely are, but in a constant and significant way. Holden began to actively participate in the language sessions. At first, he was mostly an observer, holding a doll or flipping a card when asked. Gradually, he became more involved, learning alongside Tessa, sometimes making pronunciation mistakes that made the girl correct him seriously. "It's not bonjour, Daddy. It's bonjour," she would say, emphasizing the correct sound. He accepted the corrections with humility, realizing that these small moments of role reversal, where she was the teacher and he the student, seemed to give Tessa a confidence he had never seen before. One evening, while Holden was reading a report in his office, he heard a light knock on the door. It was Tessa, holding a children's book he hadn't seen in years. "Can you read?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Holden felt a wave of emotion so intense that for a moment he couldn't answer. That book, The Little Prince, had been a gift from Charlotte. Before her illness, before everything changed, she used to read to Tessa every night. "Of course," he finally replied, putting down the papers. "Shall we go to your room?" Tessa shook her head. "Here." She climbed into the extra chair in the office, settling in with the book. Holden realized she wanted to be in his space, a reciprocity for the invitation she had extended earlier. He began to read, his voice initially unsure, then gaining confidence. Tessa listened attentively, occasionally pointing to an illustration or word. When they reached the famous line about seeing with the heart, she said, "Le cœur voit mieux que les yeux." "What does that mean?" Holden asked, surprised. "It's the same sentence in French," Tessa explained. "The heart sees better than the eyes." Holden looked at his daughter with renewed admiration. There was a wisdom there, a depth he had never realized, or perhaps had never allowed himself to see. On weekends, they established new routines, pancakes on Saturdays, short walks on Sundays, usually just in the garden or the nearby park, where Tessa could watch birds and insects. Eleanor often accompanied them, serving as a bridge when communication became difficult, suggesting words when Tessa seemed to be searching for a way to express herself. One afternoon, as they were returning from one of these walks, Holden commented to Eleanor, "I always thought she was limited somehow, that her autism prevented her from understanding, from feeling, from connecting." Eleanor watched Tessa a few steps ahead, squatting to examine a small yellow flower growing between the cracks in the sidewalk. "She isn't limited," she replied softly, "just different. Her brain processes the world in a way most of us don't understand. But that doesn't mean it's less valid, less profound, or less meaningful." Holden nodded, watching his daughter with new eyes. "I think I was expecting her to adapt to my world," he said, more to himself than to Elena. "When I should have been the one to find a way into hers." "It's not too late for that," Elena replied. It's never too late to truly know someone we love. That night, after Tessa had gone to sleep, Holden lay awake, thinking about everything he had discovered in recent weeks. His daughter was not who he thought she was. She was infinitely more complex, more interesting, more capable. The problem had never been her, but rather the lens through which he viewed her. He thought of Charlotte, of how she had always insisted that Tessa had her own light, her own way of being in the world. "She just dances to the beat of a song we can't hear," she used to say. At the time, he had interpreted this as a poetic way of accepting his daughter's limitations. Now he realized it was actually a profound wisdom about Tessa's unique nature. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel completely the pain of Charlotte's loss, the guilt for having emotionally distanced himself from Tessa, the fear of failing as a father, but also the renewed hope, the gratitude for a second chance, the admiration for the extraordinary daughter he was finally getting to know for real. The next day, as he passed Tessa's room before leaving for work, he paused a moment longer than usual. "Have a good day, sweetie." To his surprise, Tessa looked up at him and replied, "Bonne journée, papa." A wish for a good day in French, followed by the word papa, not the formal daddy she occasionally used, but the affectionate papa, laden with an intimacy he hadn't heard in years. It was with this word resonating in his heart that Holden left to face the day, knowing that whatever professional challenge lay ahead, nothing would be as important as what he was building at home, a reconnection, a bridge, a way back to his daughter's heart. As winter approached, the days grew shorter and the nights longer. The Mercer house, once so silent, now seemed to breathe with a new life. Laughter was rare, but it existed. Conversations were still brief, but meaningful. And there was music, not just what occasionally played on the kitchen radio, but the more subtle melody of the three inhabitants of that house learning to harmonize their lives. Tessa continued to blossom. Her vocabulary in various languages grew daily, and with it, her confidence. There were still difficult moments, days when sounds seemed too loud, colors too intense, the world too complex. Days when she would retreat to her room, seeking the familiar comfort of her dolls and routines. But even in those moments, there was a difference. She was now able to communicate when she needed space, when things became too much. Troppo, she would say in Italian, too much. And both Holden and Elena would respect it, backing off, giving her the time she needed to process, to rebalance. On a particularly cold Friday night, after Tessa had gone to sleep, Holden found Elena in the living room. She was sitting by the window, a book open in her lap, watching the first snowflakes of the season fall gently outside. "A glass of wine," he offered, holding 2 glasses. Eleanor seemed momentarily surprised by the invitation, but smiled and nodded. "Thank you." Holden sat in the opposite armchair, handing her one of the glasses. For a moment, they just enjoyed the comfortable silence that had settled between them, no longer the tense silence of the first few months, but something quieter, more familiar. "Tessa asked me today how to say snow cloud in Japanese," Holden commented with a small smile. Eleanor raised her eyebrows. "Japanese? That's new. What did you say?" "That I had no idea," Holden laughed. "And that maybe you would know." "Yuki no Kumo," Elena replied after a moment's thought. "Though my Japanese is quite rusty." Holden watched her with curiosity. "How many languages do you speak anyway?" Elena took a small sip of wine before answering. Fluently. 6. Spanish, English, French, Italian, Portuguese, and German. I have a basic knowledge of Japanese, Russian, and Arabic. And a little ASL, of course. "Impressive," Holden said, genuinely amazed. "I've always struggled with languages. I took 3 years of French in high school and can barely ask for directions." Eleanor smiled. "It's a matter of practice. And necessity. How did you learn so many?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Elena looked at the snow outside, as if searching for the words in the white shapes dancing against the dark sky. "I had a privileged upbringing," she said finally. "My family had resources." There was something in her tone, a studied lightness that didn't match the weight of the words, that piqued Holden's curiosity. "Had?" Elena nodded, still looking out the window. "We lost everything when I was 15. My father made some bad investments, trusted the wrong people. In 6 months, we went from a 6-bedroom mansion to a 1-bedroom apartment in a not-so-great neighborhood. Holden hadn't expected such a direct revelation. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Elena replied, finally turning to him. There was no self-pity in her eyes, just a quiet clarity. "It was the best thing that could have happened to me." "How so?" Elena placed her glass on the side table, gathering her thoughts. "Before that, I was a spoiled, overprotected teenager, alienated from reality. I had private tutors for music, art, languages, things I took for granted that I didn't even realize were privileges." She paused, a small smile appearing on her lips at the memory. "When we lost everything, it was like a hurricane had passed through our lives. Suddenly, there was no driver to take me to school, no more designer clothes, no more international trips. My father fell into a depression. My mother, who had never worked, got a job as a secretary. That must have been hard," Holden commented, trying to imagine a young Elena facing such an upheaval. "It was," she admitted. "The first few months were terrible. I was angry, confused, resentful. I felt like my future, my identity, had been stolen from me." She looked at the snow again, now falling more heavily. "Then, one day, I was helping my mother unpack the few things we had brought to the new apartment. I found an old notebook where I used to write down phrases in different languages. I started flipping through it and realized something. Those words, that knowledge, no one could take that from me. The house was gone, the money was gone, even some friends had disappeared. But what I had learned, that remained." Holden nodded, understanding. He himself had found refuge in knowledge after losing Charlotte, though in a different way, more as an escape than as a strength. "That's when I started taking languages really seriously," Elena continued, "no longer as a rich girl's hobby, but as something that could define me, sustain me. I got a scholarship to finish high school and then college. I tutored to help out at home. I used what I knew to build something new." "And your parents?" Holden asked. "My father never fully recovered. He passed away 5 years ago from a heart attack. My mother lives in a small town upstate with my aunt. They're doing okay, all things considered." Holden noted how Elena spoke of her history without drama or self-indulgence. There was a quiet strength there, an acceptance that he admired. "I think I can understand why you and Tessa connected so easily," he said after a moment. "You truly value knowledge, not as status or a tool, but as something essential." Elena smiled, surprised by the insightful observation. "I'd never thought of it that way. But I think you're right. When you lose everything external, you start to value what's internal, what no one can take from you." They fell silent for a moment, watching the snow that now covered the garden with a white, untouched blanket. "How did you deal with it all?" Holden finally asked. "The loss, the change. It seems you came out of the experience stronger, not more bitter." Eleanor reflected for a moment before answering. "At first, it was hard not to feel bitter, not for the material loss itself, but for the feeling that the future I had imagined had been stolen. It took me a while to realize that future was never really mine. It was just a possibility, not a guarantee." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What I had left was what no one could take away, what I knew, and who I chose to be." The simplicity and depth of the sentence struck Holden. There was a wisdom there that resonated with his own journey, the struggle to redefine himself after loss, to find meaning when the map of life is suddenly torn and redrawn. "Who you chose to be," he repeated, almost to himself. "Every day is a choice," Elena continued. "I can choose to see what I lost or what I gained. I can mourn the life I could have had, or embrace the one I have. In the end, what really matters isn't what happens to us, but how we respond to it." Holden thought of his own response to losing Charlotte, the withdrawal, the plunge into work, the emotional distance from Tessa. He had chosen the safety of absence, the control of distance. Only now was he beginning to find his way back. "You are a remarkable woman, Elena Marlowe," he said finally, raising his glass in a small toast. She smiled, a light blush coloring her cheeks. "Just someone who learned some hard lessons early in life." They continued talking as the snow fell outside, forming a silent blanket over the world. They talked about books, music, places they'd like to visit. Holden told her a little about his work, about the challenges of balancing professional responsibilities with his new determination to be more present for Tessa. It was the first time they had talked like this, not as employer and employee, but as two people sharing stories, discovering common ground, building a bridge of mutual understanding. When the living room clock struck 11, Elena stood up, collecting her empty glass. "It's getting late. We've got a busy day tomorrow." Holden nodded, also getting up. "Thank you for the conversation, and for sharing your story." "Thank you for listening," she replied with a sincere smile. As he went upstairs to check on Tessa before turning in, Holden reflected on what he had learned. Eleanor's story had touched him not only for the courage and resilience it showed, but for the parallel with his own situation. Both had faced profound losses, radical changes. The difference was in the response. What I had left was what no one could take away. What I knew, and who I chose to be. Elena's words echoed in his mind. Who had he chosen to be after losing Charlotte? What choices was he making now, every day, regarding Tessa, himself, the future? He stopped at his daughter's bedroom door, watching her sleep peacefully, surrounded by her dolls. There was so much to learn, so much to rediscover. And maybe, he thought, it was never too late to choose to be someone better, someone more present, someone braver. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world with new and unexplored possibilities. The last days of December brought not only the snow piling up on the windowsills, but also a subtle and profound transformation within the Mercer house. Like a flower that, after a long winter, finally finds the warmth needed to open its petals, Tessa began to reveal herself in ways that surprised both Holden and Elena. On one particularly sunny morning, while they were having breakfast, Tessa was watching the birds flocking to the feeder Holden had installed in the garden. Suddenly, without warning, she said, "Los pájaros tienen hambre." They are looking for food, Nella Neve. The sentence, which combined Spanish, English, and Italian in a mix that made perfect sense to her, caught Holden by surprise. He glanced at Elena, who smiled softly, showing no sign of alarm. "Yes, they are hungry," Holden replied, following the natural flow of the conversation. "Winter makes it hard for them to find food." "Voglio aiutare," Tessa said. "I want to help him," in Italian. Then, looking directly at her father, she added in English, "Can I feed them?" "Of course," Holden replied, adopting the language his daughter had chosen. "I will do it together after breakfast." A small smile appeared on Tessa's face, still rare, still contained, but genuine. There was something else there, something beyond the words. There was pleasure. Pleasure in the connection, in the communication, in the ability to express a desire and be understood. These small interactions began to become more frequent, small everyday miracles that brightened the days. Tessa still preferred silence much of the time, still needed her space and her routines. But now there were windows that opened, moments when she chose to connect, using multiple languages as bridges to the outside world. One afternoon, while Eleanor was helping her with a new puzzle, Tessa said suddenly, "J'aime quand tu souris." Eleanor, surprised by the statement, "I like it when you smile," in French, replied, "Et j'aime quand tu parles." Tessa thought for a moment, then said, "I like words. They have, how do you say, different shapes in your mouth." It was the longest and most complex sentence Elena had ever heard her say in English, not just for its structure, but for its content, a reflection on language itself, a metacognition that revealed the depth of Tessa's mind. "Texture," Elena suggested. "Words have different textures." "Yes, texture." Tessa tested the word, savoring it. "Italian is soft, French is round, Spanish is fast." She paused. "English is pointy." Elena laughed, delighted by the perfect description. "And Portuguese," Tessa reflected, her face serious in concentration. "Portuguese is, I like dancing." That was precisely it, a description that few adult linguists could formulate so succinctly, capturing the musical, flowing essence of the language. That's a brilliant observation, Tessa, Elena said, genuinely impressed. The girl didn't respond verbally, but her eyes shone with acknowledgement, with the satisfaction of being understood. On another occasion, during dinner, Holden talked about a difficult meeting at work. He was explaining a complex problem when he noticed Tessa watching him intently. "You're upset," she said, surprising him with the emotional observation. "A little," Holden admitted. "It was a tough day." Tessa thought for a moment, then said, "Cuando estoy triste, Elena me enseña palabras bonitas." Holden looked at Elena, who translated softly, "When I'm sad, Elena teaches me beautiful words." "It's true," Elena confirmed with a smile. "Our beautiful words help chase the sadness away." Tessa got up from her chair, went to the kitchen drawer where Elena kept the language cards, and came back with one. She handed it to Holden. "Esperanza," she read, pointing to the Spanish word. "Hope," she continued, indicating the English equivalent. Espoir, Speranza, Hoffnung, hope in 5 languages offered as a gift like a balm. Holden felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you, Tessa. Those are very beautiful words." Tessa's transformation went beyond the words that now flowed more freely. There was a new quality to her presence, a sparkle in her eyes, a lightness in her movements. Small laughs that occasionally escaped when Eleanor told a funny story or when one of the dolls said something amusing in their language game. One Saturday morning, Holden found her in the garden, kneeling in the snow, touching the ice crystals that had formed on the leaves of a bush. "Diamonds, Freud's," she said, looking up at him. "Cold diamonds." "That's a perfect description," Holden replied, crouching beside her. "The snow speaks in whispers," Tessa continued, surprising him with the poetic metaphor. "You have to be very quiet to hear it." Holden fell silent, listening to the light crunch of the flakes that were still falling. Tessa was right. There was a language there, subtle, almost imperceptible, that could only be heard by those who truly paid attention. In that moment, looking at his daughter, her serene face, her bright eyes, her small hands exploring the world with curiosity, Holden felt an emotion so profound he could barely breathe. Tessa was so alive, so present, so herself. "You are extraordinary," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Tessa looked at him, a faint expression of surprise on her face. "I'm just me," she replied simply, before turning her attention back to the snow. But that was exactly what made her extraordinary in Holden's eyes, the fact that finally, after so long, she was simply herself. Without masks, without walls, without the constant need to hide or adapt. In her own house, Tessa finally felt safe to be who she was, heard, respected, welcomed by her own home. At night, after Tessa had gone to sleep, Holden found Elena in the living room, organizing some materials for the next day. "Yes, she's really flourishing," he commented, still marveling at what he had witnessed in the garden. "It's incredible, isn't it?" Elena agreed, her eyes shining. "The way she combines languages now, it's not confusion, it's creativity. It's like she's created her own dialect." "And it's not just the language," Holden said. "It's her whole demeanor, more open, more connected." Elena nodded. "She feels safe now, understood." "Because of you," Holden said. "Because of us," Elena corrected. "You've been a wonderful father, Holden. The effort you've made, the way you've learned to communicate with her, it's made all the difference." Holden smiled, grateful for the acknowledgement. There was a moment of comfortable silence between them. "I noticed you got that call today," he finally commented, referring to a phone call Elena had taken earlier. "It sounded important." Elena hesitated before answering. "It was from the Jefferson Language Institute. They're looking for a language professor for the next semester." "Oh," Holden said, feeling an unexpected tightness in his chest. "That's a great opportunity." "Yes," Elena agreed, her gaze distant. "It would be full-time, with benefits, a good salary." Holden tried to keep his voice casual, ignoring the sudden anxiety he felt. "Are you going to take it?" "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I asked for a few days to think about it." Holden nodded, trying to process the idea of Eleanor leaving their lives. The thought was more disturbing than he expected. "You're brilliant, Eleanor," he said finally, trying to sound rational, adult. Maybe this house isn't enough for your talent. You deserve an opportunity like that. The words came out forced, almost rehearsed, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as her. That's when they heard it, a small noise on the stairs. They both turned to see Tessa standing there, still in her flannel pajamas, hugging one of her dolls. Her eyes were wide, fixed on them, and her body seemed tense, alert. Tessa, Holden said, surprised. What are you doing awake, sweetie? Did you have a nightmare? Tessa didn't answer the question. Instead, she walked toward them, her steps determined, her eyes never leaving her father's face. She stopped in front of him, her small body straight, her shoulders back, a posture Holden had never seen on her before. If she leaves, she began, her voice clear and firm, without any hesitation, I won't speak to you anymore. The sentence hit Holden like an electric shock. It wasn't just the content, a clear statement of intent, a line drawn in the sand, but the delivery, direct, emotional, resolute. There was no confusion of languages, no metaphors or analogies. Just a raw truth, expressed with a firmness he had never imagined his shy, withdrawn daughter could demonstrate. Tessa, he began, unsure how to respond, but the girl wasn't finished. She looked at Elena, then back at her father. She understands me, she said, the words coming out with a palpable intensity. She listens to me. For real. Holden felt his eyes sting. The simplicity of the words carried an implicit accusation that hit him deeply. For years, he hadn't really listened, hadn't really understood his daughter, not in the way she needed. Eleanor stood up and approached Tessa, kneeling to be at her eye level. Tessa, don't worry, she said softly. I haven't made any decision, and even if I decided to take the job, we could still see each other. I wouldn't be going far away. But Tessa shook her head, refusing the consolation. It wouldn't be the same, she said, her voice lowering slightly, but still firm. You belong here, with us. The simple statement held a world of meaning. It wasn't a childish whim or emotional manipulation. It was a deeply felt truth, expressed with surprising clarity. Holden looked at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. There she was, standing in his living room, defending what she believed in, expressing her feelings without fear. The transformation was extraordinary, not because Tessa had become someone different, but because she was finally allowing herself to be fully who she had always been. And then he understood. It wasn't about talent or professional opportunities. It wasn't about teaching or learning languages. It was about presence, about being seen, heard, understood. About love, in its purest, most fundamental form. You're right, Tessa, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. Elena belongs here, with us. Tessa's eyes met his, a direct, intentional, rare contact, and he saw there not just determination, but also vulnerability, fear, the awareness of what was at stake. I'll talk to her, he promised. We'll find a solution, together. Tessa held his gaze for another moment, as if assessing the sincerity of his promise. Then, apparently satisfied, she nodded slightly. Je veux qu'elle reste, she said. I want her to stay, in French. Then, without another word, she turned and went upstairs, leaving the adults in a silence heavy with meaning. The next morning, after a night of reflection, Holden asked Elena to meet him in his office. She entered with a serene expression, but he noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders. I spent the night thinking about the Jefferson Institute, he began. Holden, He held up a hand, gently asking her to let him continue. It's a wonderful opportunity. And you deserve every door that opens for you. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But I have a different proposal to make. Elena watched him attentively, curious. I would like you to stay, not as a nanny or a tutor, but as Tessa's official educator. Elena blinked, surprised. Official educator? Yes. You'd have a salary comparable to what the Institute is offering, benefits and more flexible hours. Holden smiled slightly. And you could continue the work you're already doing so brilliantly, helping Tessa develop her unique potential. Are you offering me a position you just invented? Elena asked, a mix of amusement and emotion in her voice. "I'm offering a formal recognition of what you already are to us," Holden replied with sincerity. "An essential part of our family." The word hung between them, laden with meaning. It wasn't just a job offer, it was an invitation to something deeper, more permanent. "And the institute?" Elena asked. "Maybe we can find a middle ground. You could teach a few classes there, maintain your connection to the academic world. But your main focus would be Tessa." Elena looked out the window, at the snow-covered garden where Tessa was now playing, building a small sculpture with the fresh snow. "She's extraordinary, isn't she?" she said softly. "Yes," Holden agreed, following her gaze. "And I almost lost that." "I almost lost her." Elena turned to him, her eyes shining. "I accept your proposal, Holden, on one condition." "What is it?" "That you understand, I'm not here to fix Tessa. She doesn't need to be fixed. She never did." Holden nodded, understanding the depth of what Elena was saying. "I know that now. She just needed to be seen. Truly seen." When they told Tessa the news, her reaction was subtle but revealing. A small smile, a glint in her eyes, and a simple phrase that mixed, as was her custom, different languages. "Notre famille, nossa familia, nuestra familia." Our family, in 3 different languages. A simple truth expressed in Tessa's unique way. In the weeks that followed, the Mercer house, once so silent and empty, began to pulse with a new life. It wasn't a loud or dramatic transformation. There were still silences, still moments of introspection, but they were comfortable, chosen silences, not imposed by fear or misunderstanding. Tessa still spoke little, but what she said with clarity and purpose. Each word now seemed like a conscious gift, no longer a painful effort or an obligation. And Holden learned, day by day, to listen not only to what his daughter said, but how she said it, the rhythms of her communication, the pauses as meaningful as the words. Elena set up an office in the spare room, where she planned lessons and occasionally received students from the institute for tutoring. Tessa often joined these sessions, absorbing new languages, new expressions, expanding her linguistic universe with an ease that impressed everyone. One January afternoon, as a light snow fell outside, Holden found Tessa and Elena in the living room, laughing together as they practiced some kind of game with the multilingual dolls. He paused at the door, not wanting to interrupt, just observing the scene. Tessa was different, not drastically, not in a way a stranger might notice, but profoundly, in ways that only someone who truly knew her could perceive. There was a subtle confidence in her movements, a fuller presence in her gaze. She was, finally, at home, not just in the physical sense, but in her own being. When Tessa noticed him standing at the door, she didn't withdraw as she would have months before. Instead, she looked up and said, with her characteristic mix of languages, "Viens jouer avec nous, papa, come play with us." A simple invitation, offered without hesitation, a bridge extended, a heart opened. Holden smiled and joined them on the floor, accepting the doll Tessa offered him, Nina, the one that represented sign language. It was perfect, he thought. They were all learning new ways of communication, new languages of the heart. That night, after Tessa fell asleep, Holden stood for a moment longer by her bed, observing her serene face. The dolls were arranged around her, like silent guardians of her dreams. He thought of Charlotte, of how she had always insisted that Tessa had her own light, her own way of being in the world. "She doesn't need to be like everyone else," she used to say. "She needs to be exactly who she is." Charlotte was right, as she almost always had been. Tessa didn't need to be fixed. She needed to be seen. And it was in Elena's gentle silence that she found her voice, and in Holden's finally open arms, she found the father she had always been waiting for. The Mercer house, so empty after Charlotte's departure, so silent during the years of grief and distance, was now breathing again. The walls, once cold, now held echoes of conversations in multiple languages, of unexpected laughter, of deep and true connections. Father and daughter were connected. Elena was staying. Everything was, finally, in its place. If this story touched your heart,